The diner was alive with the usual morning chaos, plates clattering, coffee brewing, and the murmur of conversations blending into a steady hum. Yet for Evelyn Carter, an 80-year-old grandmother, with trembling hands and eyes sharp despite her years, the world slowed when her gaze landed on the young waitress weaving between the tables. Something about her presence struck like lightning, her eyes, the shape of her face, even the way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. With a trembling voice that barely carried over the diner's chatter, she whispered words that changed everything. "You're my granddaughter." The waitress, Emily Ross, had been used to being invisible. Another young woman in a faded uniform pouring coffee, balancing plates and smiling politely for tips. But those words stopped her cold. Her hand froze midair, the steaming coffee pot tilting dangerously as her chest tightened. Raised in the foster system, Emily had spent years wondering who she really was. The questions had gnawed at her during sleepless nights. Why was I abandoned? Did my family ever want me? Hearing this stranger, this elderly woman, claim her as kin felt impossible, yet her heart pounded with something she had never felt before: hope. Before Emily could speak, the sharp crash of glass shattered the diner's rhythm. At the far corner booth sat Richard Hayes, a billionaire known across the state for his oil empire and ruthless business tactics. Moments earlier, he had been sipping his whiskey with the cold composure of a man untouchable by the world. Now his face was pale, his eyes wide with horror as they locked onto Emily. He clutched his chest, staggered, and collapsed onto the polished floor with a sickening thud. Panic erupted, customers screamed, waiters dropped trays, and someone shouted for help. Yet Evelyn didn't rush to him. Her gaze stayed locked on Emily, her voice trembling with fury and heartbreak as she muttered, "I should have known he was here." The paramedics rushed into the diner, their heavy boots thudding against the tiled floor as they pushed through the circle of stunned customers. A gurney rattled behind them, and oxygen masks swung from their hands. They dropped to their knees beside Richard Hayes, the billionaire oil tycoon, who now looked nothing like the untouchable figure from business magazines. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face pale as paper, his chest rising in shallow, desperate gasps. "Clear the area!" One medic barked, but no one moved. The diner, moments ago, filled with the normal clatter of dishes and the hum of morning conversations, had transformed into a theater of silence and shock. All eyes were fixed on three people: the frail grandmother, the trembling waitress, and the fallen billionaire. And then Evelyn Carter's voice rose above the chaos. Shaky, yes, but sharp and commanding. It cut through the air like a blade. "Richard Hayes is the reason my daughter vanished all those years ago." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The paramedics exchanged bewildered glances, but kept working, strapping monitors, checking his pulse, preparing the defibrillator. Evelyn's words, however, seized everyone's attention, freezing them where they stood. Emily, the young waitress still clutching the coffee pot, felt her knees weaken. Evelyn turned toward her, tears pooling in her faded blue eyes. "And Emily? He's your grandfather." The diner seemed to collapse into silence. Forks slipped from hands. A baby somewhere in the corner whimpered, then went quiet, as if even the child sensed the weight of what had just been spoken. Dozens of strangers stared at Emily, who suddenly felt every gaze pressing against her like a physical weight. In a trembling voice, Evelyn began to pour out decades of buried truth. She spoke of her daughter, bright, beautiful, and young, who had fallen into Richard's orbit. How their secret affair had been hushed to protect his pristine reputation. How, when her daughter became pregnant, she was cast aside, hidden away, and eventually left to raise the child alone. And when life became unbearable, the baby, Emily, was swept into the foster system, lost to the world. Evelyn's voice cracked, but her words struck harder than any shout. The billionaire's empire, built on money, lies, and silence, was crumbling. Not in a boardroom or a courtroom, but right there in the middle of a small-town diner. The truth had finally broken through, and it was louder than sirens, heavier than wealth, and more powerful than Richard Hayes himself. Later that night, the diner was unrecognizable. The rush of voices, the clinking of plates, and the chaos of the morning had faded into stillness. Chairs were stacked upside down on tables. The polished floor gleamed faintly under the soft neon glow from the window, and the smell of strong coffee still lingered in the air like a memory that refused to leave. Outside, rain tapped gently against the glass, the sound mingling with the hum of the flickering sign that read, "Open," though the doors were locked tight. At a corner booth sat Emily Ross, shoulders hunched, eyes rimmed red from the storm of emotions that had battered her all day. Across from her, Evelyn Carter sat with the weariness of decades etched into her face. Yet there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there for years. They were two women, one young, one old, tied together by loss, secrets, and a fragile hope that tonight had finally brought into the open. Evelyn slowly reached across the table, her wrinkled hand trembling as it closed over Emily's. Her touch was frail, almost weightless, yet it carried the warmth of belonging Emily had craved her entire life. Evelyn's voice broke the silence, soft but steady, each word trembling under the weight of memory. "I searched for years, Emily," she whispered, her throat tight with tears. "Every day I prayed I'd find you. Families can be torn apart, stolen from us, scattered to the wind. But love," she squeezed Emily's hand, "love always finds a way back." Emily blinked rapidly, her breath catching in her chest. Her entire life flashed through her mind. The birthdays spent alone, the cold walls of foster homes, the ache of watching other children reunited with parents who never came for her. She had taught herself not to hope because hope had always led to disappointment. And yet, sitting here, staring into the face of the grandmother she never knew she had, Emily felt something she had never dared to believe in before. She belonged to someone. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she whispered, "All those years. I thought no one wanted me." Evelyn shook her head fiercely, her frail frame trembling with conviction. "You were never unwanted, Emily. You were hidden. Taken from us because of shame, because of his lies. But you were always loved. I never stopped looking. I never stopped believing." Emily pressed her free hand over her mouth, stifling a sob. For so long, she had seen herself only as a waitress, a nameless face serving coffee to strangers, surviving one shift at a time. But in this moment, she was something more. She was a granddaughter. She was a survivor. She was the living proof that truth, no matter how deeply buried, had the power to surface and heal. The neon light flickered, casting pink and blue shadows across their tear-streaked faces. Emily's trembling eased as she looked into Evelyn's eyes, seeing in them not just sorrow but fierce love and pride. And it was then she realized a truth that no amount of wealth or power could ever match. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but family, the arms that finally welcome you home. Even after years of absence, Emily leaned forward, resting her forehead gently against Evelyn's. The diner was empty, the night silent, but in that quiet space, 2 generations of pain dissolved into a single moment of healing. And for the first time in her life, Emily wasn't just a waitress, lost and forgotten. She was found,